Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's web conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Tech Talk. Today's topic, Regression Suite Automation Tool, Background and Setup. My name is Janice and I'm going to be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this web conference through Teams live events and the audio can be heard through your PC speakers. Today's web conference is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. If you do not consent to be a part of a recorded session, we ask that you please disconnect at this time. Attendees may access the web conference recording within 72 hours via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, you can turn on the Q&A panel by selecting the question mark icon located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We do have presenters standing by to answer your questions throughout the session. Now, on to the show. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Senior Solutions Architect Archana Prasad, and joining Archana is Senior Solutions Architect Mark Dedeher. So without any further delay, Archana, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Janice. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this two-part Tech Talk that covers a walkthrough of the installation and setup of Regression Suite Automation Tool, or RSAT, along with the demo of RSAT features, which we'll be taking up in tomorrow's session. So for this specific Tech Talk, we would like to start off with a quick intro into one version and the concept of continuous updates before segueing into an overview of RSAT. Post that, I will hand off to Mark for the installation walkthrough. So on that note, the concept of one version was introduced by Microsoft in July 2018 with the idea that all of our customers need to be on the latest product version, which in turn helps to ensure that the customers will stay current in a consistent and predictable manner. What that means is that we are releasing continuous updates on a monthly basis with 2 major updates per year, one in April, another in October. And this is how the release cadence look like. I'm sure most of you guys have already seen this in our docs. And you can see that there's a concept of self-update, and then there's a concept of auto-update. The packages that are applied for both of the self-update and auto-update, they are the same. The difference being self-update is where customers can uptake the package and apply it on your sandbox and production by yourself, while in auto update, Microsoft applies this package onto your sandbox and production. The auto update schedule, that is dependent on the update cadence that is set up on this page in LCS project settings. There is also a feature to temporarily pause the updates, but you may choose to pause only up to 2 consecutive updates at a time. What that means is that you're required to take a minimum of 4 service updates per year, which effectively translates to 4 regression testing cycles per year. Even in auto update, you are given 7 days to validate and sign off on the sandbox before Microsoft applies these service updates onto production. So effectively, all of this, what it means is that you need to have a regression testing plan in place, which involves a regression testing strategy, having a regression testing tool, and skilled resources who are familiar with this regression testing tool. With that in mind, Microsoft has introduced a Regression Suite Automation Tool, or what we call as RSAT. I do want to call out, though, that the idea is not to say our customers should mandatorily use this specific tool. The idea is that with the number of regression testing cycles that need to be a part of your continuous update journey now, we need our customers to have a regression testing tool in place. It can be any of it. Our offering is Regression Suite Automation Tool. So what is that tool? So essentially the rule of thumb for RSAT is that anything that can be recorded using a finance and operations task recorder, that can be utilized by RSAT into an automated test suite. So essentially, the business critical test scenarios can be recorded using Finance and Operations Task Recorder. You can then convert them into a suite of automated tests without needing to write source code, which essentially means our targeted audience is functional power users. And when should this be utilized? It can be utilized as part of your UAT, as and when you take a Microsoft service update, or you can also utilize this tool for running the test whenever you're applying a custom code or configurations before you promote those changes to your production environment. Now, why this tool? Essentially, with the number of regression testing cycles that we were talking about a while ago, that's about 4 in the world of version 10 or in the world of continuous updates. The manual efforts that are required to test it after uptaking every continuous update, that can be significantly reduced, both the time and the cost of executing those regression tests by utilizing RSAT. Now, before I hand off to Mark to walk through the installation, just want to call out a couple of requirements for RSAT. So technically, RSAT is supported on any version higher than Platform Update 20, but do note that care needs to be taken with respect to application version. This is because the task recordings that you will make in, let's say, version 7, if any of your customers or if any of you are on 7X, that may not be reusable in version 10. So do make sure that, yes, RSAT is supported on any version higher than Platform Update 20, but do take note of the application version as well. User must have access to the customer tenant, LCS, and Azure DevOps. They also must have Azure DevOps Test Manager license. Or if you have any one of these licenses, Visual Studio Enterprise, Visual Studio Test Professional, or MSDN Platform subscriber, that's good enough as well. The test client is defined as an environment from where or where you will be installing the RSAT tool. Now, RSAT tool from that test client must have access to your finance and operations application via web browser. And it also must have Excel installed to generate and edit test parameters. So these are some of the prereqs or requirements that are required for RSAT to work efficiently. With that, I'm going to hand off to Mark for starting with the demo of installation. Mark, off to you.
Thank you, Archana. All right, hope you can see my screen by now.
Looks great.
Let's start first with the environment setup, and let's have a look to the components that Archana has already described for us. So if we're looking to an implementation, and typically an implementation would be kicking off by looking into by going into the LCS. So the first thing that will happen is customer will either be using a tenant that he has already been using for other applications, or he has to create a new tenant. From the tenant, he will go into his Office portal, and from the Office portal, we would kick off the first implementation project for that customer. And then from that LCS project, what will be done is we will make link to an Azure DevOps. Here again, the same, either a customer does have already an organization in Azure DevOps, or we're going to create a new one, and we're going to create a project. And we're going to link LCS and make sure that LCS has access to the Azure DevOps project, be able to write into it, and also be able to retrieve artifacts from it. From LCS, as a last step, we would then start deploying the Dynamics 365 finance and operation environments. We can deploy the tier 1 environments, we can employ tier 2 standard acceptance test. But that deployment actually will also make sure that there is a link between the Dynamics 365 finance and operations environment and LCS. The last component we need to connect to those 3 components now is a machine that we will be using for running our tests. So the test client can actually be any Windows 10 machine, or could be a Windows server architecture. So you could, for instance, just for starting initial test, just use your laptop or personal PC. But once you have your test suite built and you want to run your regressions on a regular basis, maybe it is worthwhile considering having a test server for that, and then just automating the runs from the test server. And then you could look as a client could just look to the results. But basically, what is necessary is we need to have admin rights on the test client, because we will need to install the Regression Suite Automation tool. and we need to have Excel installed on the machine so that we are able for reading the parameter files. What will happen now is basically we will have a link between our Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, and we're going to use the built-in task recorder for capturing the test scripts. Those task recorders, we're going to save them into a BPM library on the LCS project. And due to the fact that we have been setting up the synchronization between LCS and Azure DevOps, the test cases will be synchronized to our Azure DevOps project library. Of course, Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations can also access the BPM just for reading the task recorders, which is also happening when we are setting up the help system. Next step is that we're going to install Regression Suite Automation tool on our test client, and we're going to configure the Regression Suite Automation tool so that it is capable of reading the test cases that has been set up in our Azure DevOps. And then we're going to connect to a Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations environment where we're going to replay the task recording and validate that it still gives the same result. It is not necessarily that we're using the same Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations environment, so the recording can be done on a different machine than the ones we're using for the replay. But of course, as Archana was indicating, we need to make sure that the versions are compatible, and of course that all parameter settings are the same in both environments. Otherwise, that could cause a different flow. And then if we have different flows, task recording would not be able to play back correctly. All right, let's start doing something. Let's go into an environment. And the first thing that we're going to look into is making sure that we have an LCS project. As mentioned, we could have already an existing implementation project and we could be using that. From time to time, we see that there are some issues with the LCS synchronization, and this is primarily due to the fact that people might have been making changes to the templates for the synchronization. And by introducing custom templates with, for instance, some mandatory fields, synchronization might be broken. So as a workaround, we could just create any LCS project, and we could be setting up an additional Visual Studio or Azure DevOps site just for making sure that we can bypass those things. Or if you say, I'm not going to work on a current implementation project, but I still want to have something for start testing it out, you can just start with creating a new project. In your LCS, if you would just click on the plus button, you would have a possibility for creating a new library. We could select any one, of course, implementation is not possible, but for instance, let's use migrate, just give it a name, RSAT, I'm going to call it Tech Talk. Product name, we should of course choose 365 for finance and operations. Product version, there is only one. Industry is not mandatory, but we could just leave it to other. And then as methodology, actually we can use also different here. But for this demo, I'm going to use Dynamics 365 for finance and operations implementation methodology. I'm not going to create it at the moment. I did that already yesterday because I needed to deploy an environment on it as well. And since that it would be taking a couple of hours, that would not be feasible. So let's just go into the one that we are having created, that I have created yesterday. And as you can see, I have actually the only step that I did already is I added an Azure subscription, and I made sure that we have an environment that we can be using for using the Regression Suite Automation tool. First step that I'm going to do is going to make sure that we have now a link between our LCS and our Azure and our Visual Studio team services, or Azure DevOps as we are calling it now. First thing, as is indicated here, is we can go into into visualstudio.com. And basically, we would see that we have an option there for either get started for free, or in my case, since I'm logged in with my Microsoft account, there will be already an organization created. So I will jump the creation of an organization. In case you don't have an organization, it would be very easy. The first screen you would get would be this creation of your new organization. And then you could just create a new one. And you would get a screen like this one, where it actually would ask you to continue. In my case, because we have this login, but it will just ask me for creating an organization. For the demo, I had been setting up the D365 Finance Operations Fast Track already, and that's the one that I'm going to use today. The only thing that I need to define is where I want to host my project, and of course, you want to make sure that it's close to where you have been deploying your environments. So for the demo I'm doing, this is Western Europe. Okay, once we have an organization, then this one, the next step that we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a project. And for a project, I'm just going to click on project and give it a name. Let's call it Regression Suite Automation Tech Talk. Important here is that we are making sure that we're changing the default version control and that we're putting it on Team Foundation version control. Work item process, we can leave it on Agile. And we're just going to create that one. Once we have created our project, the next step is we now want to make sure that our LCS has access to this project. And that's the reason why we're going to create a security token. A security token, I'm just going to use my user account. Of course, if we're setting up for real implementations, we would not use named users, but we would definitely recommend for using a generic user, just in case if a named user has been leaving the company, typically his account would be disabled, and we don't want any of those processes to be stopped automatically. But for this demo, we're just going to use my own account, and I'm going to set up a security token by just clicking on security, generate a new token, give it a name. Let's use Regression Suite Automation Tool Tech Talk again, making sure I would recommend for using a custom defined and then select a date which is valid and make sure you give full access to the token. Bear in mind that once we're creating this token, this is the only time that we will be able to see our password. And we must make sure that we are storing it so that we can be using it later on for connection. All right. The last thing that I need to set up in my Azure DevOps is making sure that I have a test plan. And this is done just by moving backwards, going to the main screen again in my project, going to my test plans. Since this is a new project, there is no test plan available. If I look on the all, you will see we don't have any test plan. And here we have the button for doing a new test plan. And this is the only place where we need the test manager license for. If you don't see this button, it means the account you're using doesn't have the test manager license included. Just let's call it also Regression Suite Automation Tool Tech Talk. Going to give it a name. And now in my Regression Suite test plan, I can create different suites. Each suite typically would be a collection of a number of test cases that you want to run together as one scenario. So creating the static suites. I'm using the static suites because you could also query-based suites, but defining queries which will be able to group the test cases together correctly is very difficult. So I would assume that this is a task which is executed manually by a test manager, and then the static suites are the easiest ones for using. And I'm going to call this demo for not always using Regression Suite Automation Tool. Okay, so this is about the setup of my Azure DevOps. Moving back to my LCS project, I still need to make the link. And I'm going to give first the name. Important here to notice, we cannot use the new name, so we cannot use the naming dev.azure.com and then the name. We still need to use the old names, where we have first the site and then visualstudio.com. So in my case, it would be Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations Fast Track.visualstudio.com. And I have to copy my security token that was created and select the project. And as you can see, my newly created project RSAT TT is there available. Now we're going to define a default mapping, and we're just going to accept that and press on the continue button. Don't forget to save it. And sometimes you will see that there is a question of coming for doing an authorization. If that's requested, then you will still have to authorize. So basically what we will be doing is we will log in into Azure DevOps, and an administrator there will have to approve this authorization, and then the setup is finished. Okay, so this is how we're connecting LCS with Azure DevOps. Next step would be that we deploy our environment, and by deploying the environment, we have created already the link between our regression, between our finance and operation and our LCS project. So the last step that we need to do is we need to install the test client. And therefore, the thing is, we're going, first of all, download our software. Software we can easily download from the web. If we're searching on Regression Suite Automation Tool, and if we're adding download to it, then typically we would come automatically here in the download pages. And that's the place where we can find a recent copy of our Regression Suite Automation Tool. Version we're having published, last published is from 20th of May. We do encourage, however, people to be joining the Insider program. And once you have been set up as Insider, you would then also have the possibility for joining our Regression Suite Automation Tool Yammer group. And in the Yammer group, you will, of course, have possibilities for asking questions and getting answers from the community. But also you will see that from time to time, we would be giving you access to early releases and intermediate releases. So if you really need to have the latest one, definitely make sure you first subscribe for the Insider program and then get access to the Yammer community. I have been downloading them already, so once we have downloaded the files, we're going to install them, and the installation is quite simple. Just we have the MSI file, double click on it, and our installation starts running. I'm just going to accept everything. The default file location is on my C drive. I'm not going to change that for the moment, and just running my installation. Notice that the installation needs to be run as administrator. So as we said earlier, you need to have admin rights on this machine where you install your Regression Suite Automation Tool. Okay, now I have my Regression Suite Automation Tool installed. I'm going to start it up. As you see, I have a button here after the installation, and I'm going to run it for the first time. And the first time it says the tool requires Selenium. Selenium has not been installed, and it asks us if we want to install the Selenium technology. The answer to that is yes, if you don't want to do it manually. And then we have everything ready for configuration. Configuration of the Regression Suite Automation tool is done via the settings page that we find over here. And we have a lot of questions that we now need to answer. So the first thing that we need to do is we must make sure that my Regression Suite Automation tool gets access to my Azure DevOps so that it can download the test cases, and also that after it has been running a test case, it can write the result back into Azure DevOps runs. So I'm going to give here the name of my Azure DevOps site. This is again the Dynamics 365. Going to give the access token. So the access token that I'm using here is the same one as for LCS. If necessarily or wanted, you can create different access tokens for different purposes. I'm going to press on my test connection, making sure I have a connection valid, and then I can start selecting. So you see my newly created project RSAT TT popping up, and then my test plan RSAT TT is there as well. With that, I have been setting up my connection from my Regression Suite Automation tool to my Azure DevOps. Second link that I need to make, if you remember my first slide, I need to make a connection with the Dynamics Finance and Operations that I'm going to use for playback. For that, I need to know the host name and the SOAP host name. The easiest way for finding that out is by logging into the environment. So if it is a tier 2, just log into the AOS. For the tier 1, just log in to the AOS machine or to the VM, and then we're just going to find out what is the host name and SOAP host name. I'm going to start the IIS manager for finding it out. And I'm just going to go onto the site and do edit bindings. And on the edit bindings, I will see two names. So the first one is my host name, and the second one is my SOAP host name. It's easily recognizable because it does have the SOAP. In case you look into a tier 2, you will see a third one for the BI server. It has BI in it, so you should not select that one. Copy those two values and then make sure you're bringing them into the two values. So the host name is the first one, and the second one is the SOAP host name. That's the one which included SOAP. All right, now we have made the connection. There are two things that I still have to configure. So the way the Regression Suite Automation tool gets access to the AOS is by means of a temp print. So we're going to make a certificate, and the certificate needs to be created on the test machine. If we are using multiple test machines, so we have multiple people running tests or multiple machines that we're going to use for tests, each of those machines will have to create its certificate, and we're going to publish the temp print into the wif.config file of the AOS. In case we're using a tier 1 environment, it's easy. There is only one AOS, and we only need to update one wif.config file. In case we are talking to a tier 2 or higher, there will be multiple AOSs, and we must do exactly the same process for each AOS. All right, how do we creating the certificate? We're just going to do a very easy mechanism, and we're going to publish the commands that I have been using afterwards and making sure that they become available on this presentation. And I'm going to create a PowerShell, and don't forget to run it as an administrator. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a certificate with the name 127.0.0.1, which is the local host. But I'm going to verify, I just want to make sure that there is not such a certificate created. For that, I'm just going to go into the local machine certificate and just ask if there are children which have a subject which contains 127.0.0.1. This machine is a brand new machine, so there is no certificate. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the command for creating the certificate. Press enter. If I now just ask for the get children, again, I should see my certificate, and I also see my thumbprint, and that's the thumbprint that I'm needing. Just copy that one. And make sure we're putting it in here into the thumbprint. Just verifying that I have the first and the last digit, because this is typically the kind of mistakes that we're making. Another commonly made mistake is that there are non-visible characters in between, and this is typically happening if you would use the cert LM manager. Cert LM local machine.msc. That's the wrong one. It helps if you type it correctly with a T. Here we go. And of course, I could see that my certificate has been created here. I could look over here and then trying to copy my thumbprint, which I will be finding here. But we have been noticing that sometimes there are invisible characters in here. And then if you copy that in your wif.config file, you will not be able to run the scripts correctly. So please do use the PowerShell, which is the safe way of getting the thumbprint. While I'm here, I'm going to do an additional step, and that's I'm going to make sure that my certificate is also known as trusted. And for that, I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it under the trusted certificates, and just paste it so that its same certificate is now as well in my personal ones as it is here into the trusted root. Okay, so with that, we know that we have created the certificate on my local machine. We do know the thumbprint. Now the last step is that we are publishing the thumbprint to the AOS, to each AOS. In my case, I'm just using a tier 1, so I only have to do it on one machine. Going back RDP to my tier 1 environment. And now I'm going to find out where the wif.config file has been installed on this machine. And the easiest way is if we're just going on to the AOS service and we do explore, we will get the directory where we need to find the wif.config. Since we're making two configuration screens and we know that if we are making mistakes in changing configuration files, we absolutely want to make sure that we have a copy. And the first step is I'm going to just copy it and make sure that I know this is the original that was copied by myself. Next one, I need to change this one. Since this device has it only available for administrators, I'm going to run my notepad as administrator. And I'm just going to open the wif.config file on that location. And open my file. Again, the first thing that I'm going to do is verifying if there is already a section in here for the 127.0.0.1. Remember, if you have multiple machines, there might be already a section for that, and then you should not create a duplicate one. We should just reuse it. This is a brand new machine, so of course there is no section. So then I'm going to either you just can copy it from our installation manual, or another way for doing it is just copy an existing one. All right, so and make sure you change it correctly. So everywhere I copied the CSU client, so I need to rename the CSU client by 127.0.0.1. I have it here again in the add name section. Well, no, that's not correct. Dot 1, okay. And then of course that thumbprint cannot be the one for the CSU client, so I need to replace that by my value. The value, I'm going to copy that from my thumbprint here and adding it over here. Going to save it. I'm just removing the empty lines. And I need to restart the AOS. For the restarting the AOS, I'm going to use an admin command prompt and just pressing the IIS reset command. And just validating that my environment has been stopped and started correctly again. Since we know that it's quite easy for making mistakes in those kind of files, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to verify that my machine has been coming up alive, and I'm just going to see if I can still browse from my test machine to the environment and going into my FinOps. As you can see, it will take a while because the AOS is still spinning up and is still trying to make sure it has all its caching. But we didn't make a mistake, luckily, and as you can see, my FinOps is back online. Almost. Yeah, there it is. All right, going back to my installation screen. The next step that I need is I need to have an admin username. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk with the AOS by encryption set up with the thumbprint, but then we need to make sure that we have sufficient access into the AOS for executing the test. So basically what we're going to do is we're just going to provide an admin account that we're going to use for for defining the roles that this tool has once it's connected. It doesn't mean that we're going to execute all our test scenarios as admin, but we're always going to connect to the AOS based on an admin role, and then later on, if we want to roll with, if we want to run our test cases with other security setup, we're just going to reduce our access. But the first connection always need to be done with administrator rights. Important here is also that you need to be in the same tenant. So my environment has been deployed into the Microsoft.com tenant, then also my admin user needs to be in that tenant. We cannot use any of the tricks that we know for giving access to other people where we just referring the provider to the right tenant. This will not work. It's only an admin user within the Dynamics that and within the tenant that has been deploying the environment that can be used for this RSAT administrator. Last step I'm going to do is I need to set up a local working directory. Basically, Regression Suite Automation tool is connecting to Azure DevOps. It will be loading the artifacts from Azure DevOps. We'll start, the first time we will start with a task recording XML file, and we need to create a DLL. So we're going to start a compilation, and we're going to create a C# file, and we're going to create a DLL file. Those files will be created in what is called my local working directory. Just going to create any location. Let's make it under the C new folder temp. And then under my temp, I'm going to create Regression Suite Automation tool and use that as my temporary working directory. All right, and I need to use a default company name. So this would be the company name typically that you're using most for running your test scripts. For my demo, I'm going to use the USMF because I'm connecting to a demo database. And that's ready now. I can save this. And also, if you want to connect to different environments, you can easily just create different files. Let's say I'm going to call this one the tier 1 settings. And if I want to switch, I can then easily switch from the different settings file and make sure that my regression suite tool is connecting to a different environment. Okay, so machine is ready. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to connect to the Azure DevOps and we're going to load our test cases. At this moment, I don't have any test case, so let's make sure we get at least something in there. And what I'm typically would be doing is go into a Dynamics environment. And would be starting my task recorder, create recording, let's call it T0101, create product. Product information management, that would be all released products. New, give it a name. That should be sufficient for now. No, let's just press the OK button, that helps. And then we would be stopping that and we would be saving. So typically, the easiest way is, since we have been a connection between our Dynamics and LCS, we could be saving it directly to LCS. And we should be able to see our libraries. And I prepared an RSAT where I just put in some easy processes. So I have a design to stock, and under design to stock, I created my product. And then I would just press OK. And that would basically create my test case. Another way that we can do is we can just go back and let's go into my LCS project. Make sure the one that I just created, I need to do a business process modeler. Haven't been doing that yet. So let's just create the library. Make sure that it's synchronized with my VSTS, so enabling VSTS synchronization. Just do the same thing, going to make a simple process structure. Let's call this T01 design to stock. And beneath that, I'm going to have a child process where I'm going to do call it T0101 create product. So either I'm saving directly from my FinOps and attach it to this process. Of course, the structure can be much more complex and can be an existing one that you are reusing. We will come back on that in the tech talk of tomorrow. But for today, for doing the simple demo, I'm going just assume that my Dynamics was not able for saving it. The workaround for those situations, and that typically happens if you're having multi-tenant environments, so you do the recordings with your partner account, for instance, and then you would not be able to save. You would still be able to save to this PC. Then you would create a local file which is called AXTR. And then from the BPM, we can just go to the BPM and upload that AXTR file from here. Create product, upload. And now we must have a little bit of patience. As you can see, we have, by just uploading or by saving directly from my finance and operations to this task, to this BPM, we have now a tab which is called requirements. And we will see that we will get work items for each process. And we need, of course, also the test name, which we will get as soon if we have a little bit of patience, and we're synchronizing the test cases. Yeah, as you can see, my test case has been created the moment that my sync test cases was running. This is an asynchronous process, so we do have, for all LCS, there are a lot of processes which are basically making sure if new test cases have been uploaded either via the AXTR file or saved directly from your finance and operations into a BPM library, that gets synchronized to your Azure DevOps. But since it's an asynchronous process which is running in the cloud, we need to have a little bit of patience before the test case will be created. What I need to do now is I need to make sure, if I'm going back to my static suite, I need to add my test cases. In my demo, there is only one, and I'm going to do that by just clicking here on the add existing one. It's easy, there is only one, so I don't need to filter, but I can easily filter here on names. And as you can see, all the names of the automatic generated test cases will start with the library name. So start with RSAT. That's the one that I want to add. Just adding that to my test case. And now, let's say for this demo, my suite is ready. What I'm going to do is I'm going to load that test suite and make a local copy of it. So you see I have my test plan. Under the test plan, I will see all my suites. And under the suite, I will see my test case. As I mentioned earlier, this is still the XML file, so we need to have something that we can execute. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to click on New. And the first time we always need to generate test execution and parameter files. Once we have our parameter files and we can make some modifications to the parameter files, we will be discussing that also in more detail tomorrow during the call. But for instance, if you would just have received a new Regression Suite Automation tool from us, then, and you know that basically the test parameters should be identical, you could next time just use generate test executed files only. This will create an Excel file for me, but also will create the C# file and my DLL file. And this is an error message. This is coming from my Excel telling me that I should accept it, but it has been creating my parameter files. So we're ready. I can have a look to the parameter file if you like. It's just an Excel file. It's locked. That's not so good. And you would be seeing the name. You would be seeing that if there are parameters, and it would be showing you what I have been doing. So I have been clicking in a name for my product number, a name for my item number. Of course, if I would rerun it now, it should fail because this number exists already. So just going to create a new number. We are today the 28th. And let's add hour and minute to it. And just let's take the same for my product name. Then we're all good. Need to fix that first, that it's still open. That was not so good. I must have somewhere in the background an Excel program which is still running. All right, let's see if we can do it this time. I'm not going to recover, just going to type it in again. 28. And hope I can save it this time. All right, and now we should be ready for executing. So now the next step is I'm just going to let it run. Going to download the Internet Explorer. That's fine with me. And as you can see, we will be spinning up our Selenium. This will trigger a browser session, which is controlled by Selenium, and it will be connecting to my finance and operation, and it will basically execute the same steps as we have been doing. So I'm not pressing on any button. It's really the tool who's controlling the screen at the moment. And you should be seeing that it's doing exactly what I did during the recording, going to the all released products, pressing on the new and filling in the parameters. As you can see, it is slower than if you would go directly to the environment, but that's because I did my demo of the recording in a tier 2 environment, and I'm playing back to that newly deployed tier 1, which is used for this demo. And there is a little bit of delay also coming from the Regression Suite Automation tool, because we need to spin up that Selenium driver, and we need to pass the information first to that Selenium window and then to the AOS. All right, I think that's it for me, what I wanted to demonstrate. Arjana, over to you if you still have some questions that you want to share with the rest of the audience.
Yes, I don't think I have been keeping up with the flurry of questions, and there are some that I have not answered. So let's start with some of it, and Mark, I need your input as well. So there's one about TFS version 2015. The question is, in TFS version 2015, I can create an access token. So is it not possible to use RSAT client with TFS version 2015? Mark, do we have a support metrics for TFS? No, right?
You need to use the cloud version. So we need to use the VSTS.
Okay. Hopefully that is answered. The next question, is it possible to execute these test cases along with schedule triggered build?
Is it possible to schedule it? Yes, we can schedule it. We do have a command version of it. This is something that I'm going to demonstrate tomorrow as well. And that's basically, since you have a command line, you can connect it to whatever you like. If you have external scheduling tools, and you want first to do need to start an interface before you can do some testing. That's all possible since we do have that command line. And then, of course, since we do have the command line, you could even connect it to your Azure DevOps build sequence. Basically, on this test machine, we should install then the Azure DevOps helper so that the build server can connect to this machine and can execute the command version of Regression Suite Automation tool.
The other questions with respect to this, and there are a couple of questions around this, I'm going to bundle them, and it is about recommended configuration for this test client where RSAT will be installed. What is the recommended configuration? I know I have not answered it quite well. What I was saying was we did not quite have a prescribed recommendation as such. But Mark, do you want to call out some of the caveats with respect to any kind of memory or CPU or disk for these RSAT machines, which is the machine in which RSAT is installed?
Yeah, so typically the minimum requirement is it needs to be a Windows 10, so the previous versions of Windows are not working. So you could use your local desktop, that's what I'm doing. But I think as long as you're in the authoring and in the testing, that's fine for using your own laptop. But once you come into a cycle that you say, I'm going to run that, let's say on a monthly basis, I'm going to run that Regression Suite Automation tool, that's typically something you don't want to run from somebody's private machine. A person might go into holidays and all those kind of things. So typically I would recommend for having a dedicated machine for that. Then you could, as I'm using here, this is a VM machine, a Windows 10 VM, but of course you could use a server version such as a Windows 2016 or 2019 as well. It just needs to have, well, of course, the speed is dependent a little bit of the memory. I would definitely put as a minimum requirement 4 GB. Here in this demo, I was running with 8 GB just for being on the safe side. But typically, the speed and the process power of the machine is not that demanding, because the only thing we're doing is we're just going to create a browser session from this machine to the AOS. So the processing itself is executed on the AOS and not on the test machine. Hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Mark. There are quite a bundle of questions. I think there's a bit of confusion around the environment. So I'm gonna kind of run through some of this. So just to clarify, you can install RSAT on an environment and then access F&O, and the finance and operations can be a tier 1 or tier 2. I understand in tier 1, you will not have admin access. What you can do is you can use cloud hosted environment. If it is tier 2, if you're in the implementation project, the older implementation projects, if you have a LCS project manager role, you will be able to RDP into those tier 2 environments. If you're in the service fabric projects, which are the newer ones for cases where you have production deployed in the last 1 month or so, there's a good chance that you might be in a service fabric type of LCS project. Your tier 2 might be locked down. In those cases, I believe we are, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we are working on ensuring that RSAT works with those type of tier 2 environments where the RDP access is locked down. But for all of you, for majority of you guys, you should be able to RDP to the tier 2. If you're not able to right now, that's because you don't have the right LCS role for that. One other thing I want to add on before I, Mark, you can also chip in, is that I did see a little bit of confusion around, based on the questions, that when you do the certificate generation, and if you are using tier 2 with more than one AOS, because some of the older tier 2s used to have only one AOS. If you have deployed a tier 2 in the last, let's say, 4 to 5 months, I believe you'll have 2 AOSs. And the thumbprint that you need to update in both these 2 AOSs are exactly the same. So you don't need to have 2 different thumbprints. When we say update both the AOS with config files with a thumbprint, is the exact same thumbprint. You're updating in both the different AOSs, and you're also adding that same in the RSAT configuration, because there are multiple questions around it. I can see that there's a bit of confusion around it.
So the thing you need to take in mind, there's a lot of questions you were talking about. So can you put everything on one VM? Yes, in a tier 1 environment, you could install the RSAT on the tier 1. but that, as you mentioned, you need to have admin rights. So you need to make sure that your tier 1, you have admin rights. So this would not be possible in a Microsoft subscription. But if you're connecting to a tier 2 environment, then I would say I would not run the test client on the AOS. I don't think it's a good practice doing that. So I would go for a test client that is on a different machine. And then I would connect, let's say, this Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations would be a tier 2. So indeed, I would not have one box here, but I would have multiple boxes. So what I have been doing with the wif.config file, indeed, you need to do it on each of those AOSs. And there is only one certificate because there is only one test machine. Then I would put the same thumbprint in each of those wif.config files. Situation is a little bit different if you want to have multiple test client machines which are connecting to the Dynamics 365. Each test client will have its own certificate because I need to create the certificate on the test machine, and I cannot copy the certificate from one machine to another. If I'm trying to do that, you will have to generate your certificate totally different than the example that I'm using here, or the example which is in our installation guide. Then you really need to install it with a private key, and you need to install the private key on a different machine. So that's definitely not the easiest way. Then I definitely would go for each test client, just generate a certificate on the local machine, and on the AOS, what you need to do then is, if I'm looking to the thumbprint, I said you need to make sure that you have only one section for 127. So in case I have a second test machine, what I would do is I just would add a second thumbprint, and this would then be the thumbprint of my second machine, like this. And of course, this would be a total different key, and that would be the one which is coming from test machine 2. And so on. Just save that. Don't forget, if you have multiple AOSs, you will have to do this modification on each AOS, and you need to restart each AOS after doing this modification. Hope this clarifies a little bit when there is a situation where you would have multiple thumbprints. This is because you would immediately know that there are multiple test clients which are able to connect to this environment. But the wif.config file must always be the same on all AOSs. You cannot have different, there is no situation where you would have differences between the different AOSs in an environment.
Okay, and there was a question regarding scan guns. In other words, the questions about whether RSAT support the warehousing app, the mobile app. We just want to call out that it does, but it is under preview right now. So if you're signing up for Insider program, and as soon as you're part of that Yammer group, we should be starting a preview group for the WMS mobile app and how RSAT supports it. Right now, it is not externally available yet, but that's what things stand for, the warehouse mobile app. There was a question, I believe I answered that privately, so I just want to make sure that the rest of the audience have that information. There are a couple of questions on Tier 1, does that mean dev environment, and Tier 2 means test environment. So we utilize the terminology Tier 1 to indicate the SQL Server development environment that comes along with the LCS project. And Tier 2 or Tier 2 Plus indicates all of those staging and test environments that you find within LCS project, which has SQL Azure and they're multi-box. So hopefully that differentiates. Let me quickly look at, is RSAT single-threaded? That is one scenario at a time.
Yes, that's absolutely true. What you can do is you can run the Regression Suite Automation tool from command line, and then you can start up multiple command lines. And you can actually also have the multiple instances of the graphical tool. So you could run multiple sessions if you like. But you need to understand this tool should not be used for multi-user threading testing. That's not the purpose of it. So basically what would happen is you would spin up 2 of those Selenium servers, and typically what you will see is they are consuming quite some memory. After, I think typically on 8 GB, after 3 or 4 of running in parallel, you will see that you're low in resources in memory and also in I/O. So definitely is not the tool for doing this kind of tests. We do have Perf SDK for that. Regression Suite Automation tool is built on top of Perf SDK, but we have stripped it down so that you don't need to configure too much about it. So the Regression Suite Automation tool is not suited for doing those kind of tests. Not if we're talking about having hundreds of Regression Suite Automation test cases running in parallel on one test machine. Then you need to look into Perf SDK.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to take probably another 3 more questions, and I'm going to make it fast. I know we have 5 minutes past meeting time. Is the thumbprint system specific or user specific? It is user specific. Is it possible to test the D364 with different security roles using RSAT? Yes, Mark will be
Archana, can I correct you a little bit? We're installing the certificate in the local machine, not in the user.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely important that you install it on local machine, but it is machine dependent. So each test machine has its own created certificate. Don't copy certificates from one machine to another. You will end up in problems.
Sorry, I stand corrected. Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Is it possible to test the D364 with different security roles using RSAT? Yes, and I think, Mark, you will be actually walking through that in the next tech talk, right?
Yeah, tomorrow we're going into much more detail about what we can be doing with the tests itself.
Okay. There is also a question about form is not the top level form. There is an issue. We are familiar with that. Yes, it is addressed in the latest, but then there are also certain caveats. We will mention that in tomorrow's tech talk. One last one. Is there an output file that shows the results of the test?
Yes.
We need to show proof to auditors that our tests were successful, so an output file would be helpful. Mark, we'll be talking through the verbose snapshots and generator logs tomorrow?
Yeah, we were going to take that tomorrow. So basically, if you go to your Azure DevOps, for each time you do a run, you have a test. You have the test runs here, and the result of it is written back into the runs.
And you will also be able to export the test results from DevOps, from the test plan. Mark, do you want to quickly show that? That little drop-down arrow on the left-hand side of demo.
It's not very successful at the moment. Come on. So we do have the runs here. And on the runs, you would be seeing the one that I was been executing. So we have the past here, but I can see the complete step in my run. Would be telling me how much, what have been running. So there was only one, and I have the test results here. And I will be seeing the steps that has been executed and so on. So this is all available as in my Azure DevOps. And of course, if we do encounter an issue, that's the place where you will be seeing what step has been causing the issue. And if we had an issue, we will have a full stacked trace of what happened, and also the information messages that were shown at that moment, or error messages.
All right. So with that, Janice, over to you. We will wrap up. I know we are literally 10 minutes past meeting time.
All right, thank you, Archana. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a brief moment here and bring your attention to a link that I just posted in the Q&A panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference. We ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference, have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, or you'd like to submit topics for future web conferences, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. Attendees can access the web conference recording via the same registration link that was used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters, Archana and Mark, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.